Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Peri Peri Chicken. That's right, the best thing about making peri peri chicken is that you have to make peri peri sauce first. And if you're not familiar with it, you should definitely learn how to make it, since it's good on so many things. And speaking of so many, there are countless versions of this sauce, so what you're about to see is just my take. And I hope you find this stuff as amazing as I do. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by reviewing the ingredients that are going into the sauce. And that's going to start with some fresh and dried chilies. And I'm going to use some fresh Fresno chilies along with a habanero, since I don't have what we're supposed to use, which is African bird chilies. And then besides those, we'll also do a little bit of red bell. And as far as the dried chilies go, I'm going to go with some smoked paprika, as well as a spoon of cayenne, which yes, we have used on the channel before. And then besides our peppers, we'll also do some fresh garlic, as well as some onion powder. And of course, we will also need a little bit of salt and pepper. And then to balance things out, a little touch of white sugar. I also like to add a little bit of fresh thyme. And then we'll finish up with our liquid ingredients, which will include some freshly squeezed lemons, some olive oil, and then last but not least, some sherry vinegar. And that's it. All we have to do to make this super simple sauce is add everything to a blender, and then we'll simply process this until completely smooth. And by the way, this is a completely raw version. Okay, some versions will add cooked things like sauteed onions, or they'll blend everything and then cook the sauce before using it. But this is my favorite version, and I think it works especially well in the raw form as a marinade and a hot sauce. And while it won't have the shelf life of a cooked version, this stuff will still last for at least 3 or 4 days in the fridge, which is way longer than it should last. And once you taste this, you'll understand why. So like I said, we'll go ahead and blend that on high until it's very smooth, at which point it's ready to use to marinate our chicken. But before we do that, we have to reserve some to use as a hot sauce later. So what we'll do is set enough aside to serve with our 4 portions of chicken, which is what I'm making here. And of course, we will give that a quick taste to get a little sneak preview. And this stuff really is incredibly tasty. And yes, very hot and relatively acidic and a little bit sweet and a little bit smoky and savory and herbaceous with that little hint of garlic. So to summarize, this has it all. And what we'll do is put that reserve sauce in the fridge until we need it. And then we'll pour the rest of it into this plastic bag. And once that's transferred in, we can move on to prep our chicken. And for this, I'm going to use 4 of these leg quarters, which were especially big. And as you might know, I like to make a couple cuts into the leg and into the thigh before these go into the marinade, just to allow for a little deeper penetration. So I made 4 cuts through the skin on each piece. And then before this goes in the marinade, I think we should generously salt this on both sides. Okay, I know we added salt to our sauce, but that was just enough to season the sauce, and not nearly enough to season this much meat. So I think we definitely need to apply some directly like this before we transfer it into that bag of marinade. So that's exactly what I did. And then once we have that chicken transferred in, we'll go ahead and seal it up and then toss it around until we are 100% positive that every single nook and cranny has been coated with that sauce. And the reason we want to use a bowl here is because if you don't, somehow a hole will get poked in the bag and it will leak all over your fridge. But if you use the bowl, it never leaks. That is just how the universe works. And then once those pieces have been thoroughly coated, and we've squeezed out the air and the bag's been sealed up nice and tight, we will pop that in the fridge to marinate for anywhere between 8 and 24 hours. Oh, and during that time, if you go into the fridge for something else, just go ahead and turn that bag over to sort of redistribute the marinade, which is not mandatory, but it is a good idea. And that's it. A day later, we can pull it out and cook it using various different methods. Okay, the simplest, and maybe my favorite, is just to simply roast it. But since grilling season just started, I'm going to go ahead and take these outside and place them skin side down on some nice hot charcoal. Oh, and by the way, do not throw away the excess marinade. We can go ahead and brush some of that on later. And yes, this is the exact same super cheap grill that I showed you a couple years ago that I said was temporary and I was only going to use it till it fell apart. Well, it never fell apart. So I'm going to keep using it till it does. But anyway, once those are on the grill, I'm going to place the cover on. And yes, the grill is ironically named Expert Grill. But anyway, my game plan here is usually about 5 minutes skin side down, and then I'll flip those over and give the other side about 10 minutes, since the other side doesn't have as much skin, so we don't have to worry as much about it burning or charring too much. And then once I've done this for about 5 minutes on the skin side and about 10 to 12 minutes on the other side, I will simply keep turning them over whenever I feel like it. And as usual, if we want to move things around because some spots are hotter than others, feel free. And eventually, once this gets towards the end of the cooking time, I'll start painting on some of that reserve marinade. And the reason I'm keeping this covered most of the time is because that's going to keep the heat in the grill, especially since it was kind of breezy out. But also, it's going to prevent our coals from becoming too hot and from burning out too fast. Okay, for chicken this size, this could take up to an hour, believe it or not. And as usual, I can't really give you a cooking time because that is, of course, going to depend on how hot your coals are, as well as what size pieces of chicken you're using. But the good news is, we don't really need to worry about time, since when the meat is cooked through and tender, it's done. And speaking of being done, there is a huge difference between a chicken leg being cooked through and a chicken leg being cooked enough. And the reason I mention that is because I pulled this chicken off about 15 to 20 minutes before I really should have, because I knew it was cooked through and safe to eat, but I also knew it wasn't really cooked enough. And the reason I did it is because the light was perfect, and I really wanted to get the final plating shots before it got too dark. So I went ahead and pulled it off and headed back inside. And besides being delicious, I think this sauce makes a beautiful marinade, since that is some pretty enticing looking chicken. And in real life, you could just throw this on plates and start eating. But of course, I had to proceed to the presentation on top of some vegetation. And of course, as always, if we have some, we will drizzle over the accumulated juices from the pan. And then you remember that peri peri sauce we set aside? That is what we want to serve with these. And I repeat, not the stuff that we use to marinate the chicken with. Okay, that would not be safe to use. You'd have to boil that first. So do not be mixing up your finishing sauce with what we use for the marinade. But anyway, I spooned some of that over, and I took some pictures, and then I plated up a portion next to a little scoop of prop potato salad. And after spooning over a little bit of extra sauce, I grabbed a fork and knife and went in for a taste. And that, my friends, is one of the most flavorful bite of chickens you will ever enjoy. All right, that peri peri sauce really is magical, and not only on top, but as a marinade. And those gorgeous flavors really penetrate right down to the bone. I think. I was having trouble getting down to the bone. And we're going to talk more about the incredible flavor in a few minutes. But right now I want to return back to that thing I said earlier about the difference between being cooked through and cooked enough. All right, if this was cooked enough, and we cut in with our knife, anywhere between the leg and the thigh, those two pieces would separate very easily, which here is obviously not happening. So until I got the tip of that knife right exactly between the ball and socket of that joint, those two pieces did not want to come apart, which means it was not cooked enough. Oh, it was cooked through, but not cooked enough. And eventually we would have probably got all the meat off, but with something this delicious, it is almost a crime to have to work this hard to get it into our mouth. So to summarize, unless you're shooting a video and you are more worried about the lighting than how tender your meat is, make sure you keep that on the heat, cooking low and slow, until it is actually, for sure, fork tender. So what I'm going to do after taking this bite of potato salad is show you what this is actually supposed to eat like. Right, the next day I took a couple leftover pieces and I popped them in a 375-degree oven until it wasn't just cooked through, but it was cooked enough. And this is really what it should look like when you cut in between the leg and the thigh with a knife. All right, you see that? Fairly easy separation. And while the meat is not falling off the bone, we do not have to work too hard to get it off the bone. But anyway, chicken doneness lessons aside, this sauce really is so incredibly delicious, and as you saw, super simple to make. And besides being good on chicken, it's also good on, well, pretty much everything else. But whether you make this sauce to use as a marinade, or you just want to whip up a batch of what is definitely one of the world's great hot sauces, either way, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.